So, Laura, it's an absolute delight to be able to welcome you to, and from the University of Cape Town to the School of Social Sciences, Education and Social Work at Queen's University, Belfast, and as part of our 30 Minutes with Research seminar series. Colleagues, by way of an introduction, Professor Czerniewicz is was the first director of the Centre for Innovation and Learning at the University of Cape Town, 2014 to 2020 to be exact. Laura's roles in education over the years include academic, researcher, advocate, teacher, teacher trainer, educational publisher. And I would add in there wonderfully supportive ally in this area and also critical friend. Threaded through Laura's work is a focus on equity and digital inequality, which permeates her research into the changing nature of higher education, which is very pertinent at the moment to us all, in a digitally mediated society, and new forms of teaching and learning provision. Laura also plays a key strategic scholarly role in areas of blended learning, online learning, as well as in open education, institutionally, nationally and internationally. Just also to mention, my connection with Laura was generously nurtured by our colleague Dina Belowici, and this has led to Laura agreeing with very little force, Laura, I would say, to come on and talk to us today, talk to us about current ideas and concerns about surveillance practices in higher education. Laura, thank you so much for giving us time today. I know how incredibly busy you are. We very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this very concerning and current matter for our sector. So I will hand over to you for 20 minutes. I'll switch off my camera, or I can leave it on, whatever feels more comfortable to you.
I wouldn't mind if you left it on. Otherwise, I'm just looking at these little circles.
I'll talk to you.
It would be really great. Thank you. So first of all, I don't have any slides, I don't have any kind of pictures, and I don't even know how long I'm going to talk for, because I'm really hoping that we can use this as a kind of catalyst for a conversation. And it's one of those things I don't know enough about you, so I can only talk about things that are on my mind and things that are worrying me. And the first thing I have to say is that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. I had a look before this talk, and I saw that about 2/3 of the adult population of Northern Ireland has been vaccinated, which is amazing. That's certainly not the case here. And not even all the health workers have been vaccinated yet. So the rollout has only just started very shakily. And until everyone's been vaccinated around the world, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, we can't open up borders. We can't actually have these conversations face to face. And so a lot of the issues that I'm talking about are not going to go away. I don't think there's any kind of notion of that world we're going to go back to. I think a lot of people say with great excitement, oh, this has been a kickstart to blended learning, and it's been a kickstart to online. And well, yes and no. There's a saying in South Africa, which Dina will recognize, which is ja, nee, which means yes, no. And some of that might be good, and some of that I think is not so good. So one of the things that's happened during this period is we've all gone online. You know, there was this online pivot, there was that moment, there were all these academic developers and learning designers and everyone, they got us all online. And so we're seeing the datafication of higher education. And you might say, well, you know, we've always had data collected. We've always had students graded. We've always had budgets. We've always, you know, what's new? And I think what's new is the scale, the variety, the volume, and the sources. So the incredible thing about going online is that we went fully into digital. And I mean, we went into digital with teaching, with learning, with research, with administration. I mean, we could take the entire student journey from the moment that they look online to see what courses they might be interested in doing. And we know those are already being tracked. There is software you can buy to track students' interest. so that you can target them if they seem to be the kind of students you want. And you've got tracking going on right through the use of the learning management system. You've got tracking going through assessment, which of course is one of the big issues of the day. Every single part of the student journey can now be tracked, and the whole research process is now digitized. And in fact, can I take a moment and ask people, which technologies, if you could just give me one moment, which technologies did your university have before that you are now using? So which technologies have become intensified? If you could just take a moment to put into the chat. Can I see the chat? Yeah, Teams and Canvas. So they were there already.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting that Canvas was already there. Anything else from anyone else? Teams. Oh, that's so interesting. So Teams was there, but we certainly had no idea how it worked. We also had Teams. Okay, so you had Zoom, Mentimeter. Okay, you already had Mentimeter. Okay, Zoom. And then what new tools did you start using? Like, when you think about it, what tools in the last year have you started using that you had never heard of? Padlet. Canvas as VLE, because Zoom wasn't allowed. Okay. What else was new? What else have you started using that's new? Okay. Okay. Loom. There's something called Loom. My goodness. I don't know. Citrix. Oh, there's all sorts of things here I haven't even heard of. That's so interesting. Lumio. Okay. I mean, this would be actually quite fascinating to carry on talking about, in fact. Okay, MindMeister, Slack. So these are all tools that somebody in your university signed a contract with a vendor to get these tools. And here's a question for however many people we have in the room. Were any of you involved in the signing of that contract? In the choice of the tool? Did any of you see the contract? So you're all educational people, you're all in the disciplines. I'm going to take the silence as a no. I want to know whether there was a single person here. Nope. Nope. I want to know. Nope. I'm really interested to know, did anybody ask you, what do you think of this tool? Should we be looking at another tool? Would you want to look at the conditions around the data? What do you think about an open source opportunity? Nope. Okay, so we've got all these tools, and the scary thing about the choice of tools is that they happened really fast. Suddenly, we've got online. We have to get the year finished. There's an academic project. There's a whole lot of problems around digital divides that we've got to address. So it's quick decisions that had to be made. And choices were made around tools. And the problem with short-term choices is that they so often turn into long-term solutions. You know, at which point are we going to say, let's have a look at these terms and conditions. Let's have a look at these affordances. Let's reconsider. A lot of those negotiations that should have happened are probably never going to happen. And I can hear some of you wondering, and so what? You know, okay, we've got them, we're using them, it works well enough or it doesn't. And there's two problems. I mean, the first problem is the content that is getting shared through those tools. And then the second problem is the wrapping, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, because the content, so you're in the UK So you're in an interesting position around GDPR. I was just having a look before the session, because you've got the GDPR requirements in place, which gives you some protection around privacy. But that's not a given going forward, because in fact, what happens is there's certain things that are in place that become practices, not legal requirements. And the legal situation in the UK is going to have to look at the content. But let's say that privacy is a consideration around the content, about what is being said. In a way, that's the easier part of considering the kind of data that happens in education. What's more difficult is what Shoshana Zuboff in her book, Digital Capitalism, calls, Surveillance Capitalism, calls digital exhaust. And it's the stuff that everyone thinks isn't really of value. It's the, and here, let me talk about education. Let me look at students and us. Where did you look? What did you look up? How long did you stay on a site? Who did you send information to about that site? Who did you share with? What did you listen to? What did you click on? So it's all of these practices and activities around the content that are all being captured. And of course, they have enormous value. And they have value in different ways. They have value because they can be sold, and they are being sold. And because we never really looked at the agreements, we agreed to them being sold. In fact, we probably agreed to Teams. I see Microsoft's just updated its terms and conditions, and I downloaded them to have a look later, but I clicked because I had a session with you guys to do so. I don't know what we agreed to. But that data is worth a lot. It's worth an incredible amount of money, and that's the reason that Turnitin, which probably a lot of you are using, the plagiarism software, was sold for $1.3 billion a couple of years ago, because that data really, really matters. But what Zuboff points out is it's not just the data that can be sold, it can also be aggregated, and it can be used to influence behavior. So adverts don't just sell you things to buy, they sell you ideas, and they sell you views and perceptions, and that's as relevant to our students as to anyone else. So you might say, okay, what's this got to do with surveillance? And once again, it's a little bit like data. We've always monitored. So let's put a kinder word on surveillance. We've always monitored. We've always written exams. We've always followed up. But because of the digitization of education and what's happened at such speed and to such an intensity in this phenomenal, bizarre experiment that happened to an entire sector and an entire generation, all student and educator activities are rendered as data that can be surveyed. And if you don't take actions to make sure that they aren't surveyed, and if you don't consider who owns those behaviors and practices and activities which form this data, then it is likely that anyone who can make a profit from that will make a profit from that, because we're in a neoliberal world, and that's the primary driver. The other thing that happens in this kind of surveillance world that we're living in is that you have an inequality of power between the companies, and some of them are the big tech companies, but some of them are smaller companies using the same business model. And the data that the services they are offering, and the data they are asking from us. So it's really difficult to refuse those services. If I said to you, I've just read the Microsoft terms and conditions this morning, and I'm not going to do the session with you because it's on Teams and I'm not happy with what happens to the data, it would be really tricky. So there is this kind of built-in inequity because of the dominant practices and the dominant discourses. And then the other thing, of course, is that all of this is normalized. So we don't think about it. It's become ordinary that we used all of these tools, and in fact, many of them are sold as a good thing to use. And so they don't get interrogated and they don't get questioned. And the fact that we now work with so many more vendors and we're involved in so much more market making is also normalized. I think I'd like to just mention one example. There's so many examples, but in a way, the easy example is Google. Okay, Google search engine. But one of the most extraordinary thing that's happened with Google during this period is Google has offered free G Suite for education. And there is this really interesting research that's starting to happen. And I actually got a couple of references which I'm just going to put in here because I won't have time to talk about them. But there's really important growing research around what Google means for education and how it's changing privacy, relationships, how the discourses of the kind of open washing, equity washing, if I can make up such a word, where it sounds very much about equity and access, but actually if you dig behind the scenes, it's about profit making at the end of the day. And just one very simple example is that there was one study, which I don't think I've included here, but I can give you, where the search engine results on the front page of Google searches were analyzed with a very large data set. And a very high percentage of those results pointed to Google products. So they went to YouTube and they went to the various products that Google owns, which means that the results are not, they're not objective, they're not responsive to the question. They're actually pointing to a possible profit-making criteria rather than the answer to the question. And there's so much happening with Google that's really frightening. And you think about the original motto of Google, which was do no evil. If one thinks about the infiltration of Google into education and the fact that it has captured an entire generation, you know, it's a lost leader, and it's so worth it because you've got this entire generation who are now part of the whole behemoth of Google and its entire family, which of course is huge. Google Gmail, Google Search, Google Docs, Google Maps, etc., etc. So that's a really obvious example. I want to try and sum up actually, because I'm really keen to have some discussions, but by complete coincidence, I was following on Twitter, which is an amazing source of just getting a sense of the zeitgeist. And there is a learning analytics conference happening right now as we speak. And one of the keynotes was Neil Selwyn, who's a very well-known critic, educational technology critic. And he was talking about the dangers of a data-driven education system. And he made 5 points about what the dangers are. He said, the dangers are, first of all, hyper-individuation, bias and fit with social context. So it's a kind of homogenizing that happens. Number 3, diminished pedagogies. So as part of this homogenizing and this automating, the role of pedagogy actually gets reduced. And linked to that is the displacement of the teacher. And then finally, this point that I've been talking about, which is the surrender to the data economy. So the corporate reforms of higher education. Yeah, I think I'm going to give you one more reference and then I'm going to stop. If you're interested in these kinds of things, there is someone who keeps an open online bibliography specifically around online proctoring, which is the most obvious form of surveillance in the higher education today, which infiltrates people's homes, invades people's privacy, exposes inequalities in the system, etc. And that's something that's really caused a huge amount of consternation. And the companies who provide these proctoring solutions don't tolerate dissent. So there's some really scary examples of people who've raised questions about them being sued. So this is quite dangerous territory. It's highly contested, and it's extremely worrying. And I think we're in a situation of enormous risk, almost like that frog in the hot water, where you don't realize that it's getting hotter and hotter until you're completely trapped or you're dead. Yeah, so can I stop there? Is that okay, Amanda?
Thank you so much, Laura. That was absolutely brilliant, actually. Totally what we need to be thinking about. And as I know you and I have talked about this, but thank you for going into that more granular detail with us. I'd be interested if colleagues, and give colleagues the opportunity to ask any questions around this. I could obviously talk to you all day, and we have had a long talk, and we had to quit really. But if people have a question, you either put it in the chat box or quickly put your camera and mic on and ask Laura a question, or you have any concerns about this area.
Or comments. I mean, how much does this resonate for you in your context?